Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Reference Point. I'm your host, Dave Cokerhook. And with me today, I've been able to bring back Sumant Pendharkar, who is with us at a previous show talking about educational activities. But today, we're going to talk about a subject that I'm very interested in, and I hope you guys will, in the viewing audience, will find interesting too, and that's self-publishing. Have you ever thought about what it would be like if you could take those wonderful concepts you have and put them into a book and find a way to get that book disseminated? We're going to talk about that today, right, Sumant?
Yes,
Isn't that what we're going to discuss?
Absolutely.
And you have written, by the way, thank you for coming back to be on my show again. I greatly appreciate that.
Thank you again for inviting me, Dave.
You have written multiple books, have you not?
Yes. I've written 8 technical books published by the big top-tier publishers,
Okay.
and 2 on my own, which are self-published, or politically correct term is independently published.
Independently published. So you have experience on both sides
On the
of
both
this
sides.
thing, which
That's
is
correct.
very interesting because as I was, my impression for many years was that if you're going to get a book out, you've got to go to one of the big publishing houses or maybe a small house. Somebody has got to send them whatever you send them,
You can send them a book proposal.
yeah, and then they go and they come back and say yes or no or maybe or whatever, and it's perceived to be a lengthy and somewhat arduous and frustrating task because you have to go through a lot of no's before you get a yes. That's the perception. Has that changed any when we move into the arena of traditional publishing to self-publishing?
Okay, let's first look at what you just said. You're absolutely right. It's a long process. I've received 60 plus rejection letters.
60 rejection letters.
Yes, it took more than 8 months to find a publisher.
This was for your first book?
First book. It gets easier later on.
I guess. Well, once you've got something that was successful, then there's a little bit of a reputation
That's right.
associated with your name.
That's correct.
And then the next one may not be as difficult.
That's right.
So the first time's the hardest,
First time is the hardest unless you're already famous
unless you're already famous.
or notorious or
Okay. Well, we've got some of the crew here that could probably fit into the famous. Well, maybe not famous. But
you'll be nice to them.
anyway, but let's talk about that. So that makes sense. If you get the first one published, then and it's successful, then there's a little bit of a name recognition and it's easier. Do you have that same hurdle on a self-published book?
No, but let's go back to your original question also about the traditional published. In today's day, it's much easier to find a publisher because you can start making a presence on the internet. And once you can send a link to your writing to various acquisition editors. So the process is much easier now and much less lengthier if you want to try and approach the traditional approach.
So what I'm taking away from what you just said is that even if you're going to have something, either a nonfiction book or a fiction book or a technical journal book or whatever, you can use technology, the internet, a blog, whatever, to kind of help lay the groundwork and then direct publishers to that so that they can get a sense of the content without having to go through the whole thing of writing something, putting it in the mail, send it to a guy in hard copy.
That's correct.
So that's nice, actually. That kind of would tend to accelerate the process, I would think. That doesn't mean you will get any fewer rejections, I'm sure.
That's right.
But
Absolutely right. And that's the rejections is unfortunately a reality because the publishing houses have X amount of dollars that they can invest in a title. And they obviously do a feasibility study to see how many copies are likely to sell. And so they will only take what they think is either going to meet or create a new need for the particular idea or will fill a need which absolutely needs to be filled.
if someone is looking at that avenue, the publishing houses, are there certain organizations, certain companies that prefer types of book, children's book versus technical book versus nonfiction versus historical novel versus that sort of thing? Or do they all do everything?
No, they don't all do everything, and they have different processes for the kind of manuscripts that they would accept. One of the best approaches is, and what I used, and this was pre-internet time, was to go to a local bookstore. My first book was back in '89.
Okay.
And so I went to Stacy's and B. Dalton's and Super Crown, which I don't know how many people have even heard of now or
Right.
know about. And I actually went through the section where I would expect, and that's an important point, expect to find a book that I had in mind.
Uh-huh. Right.
So you can't go into a reference section hoping that, and then having the book be somewhere in the, say, in the business section.
Uh-huh.
So you need to know where your book is likely to land up.
Okay.
And then what you do is you pick up some books from the shelf, especially the ones close to your topic, and see who the publisher
With
is.
the publisher. Ah.
And
okay.
here's a little tip to the audience. You look at the acknowledgement section,
The acknowledgement section.
because in the acknowledgement section, almost always the author thanks the acquisitions editor
Ah.
or the literary agent that placed him or her with that particular publisher.
Well, that is an interesting tip.
Yes. So it's a great place to look, and then in today's world with LinkedIn and with all sorts of online tools, you can try to find the person and get move direct, straight up to the person.
Very cool.
And that's how I found an acquisitions editor for one of my books.
And that's still feasible because there are still some number of hard copy books stores that you can go to, but that makes a lot of sense. I had never thought about how you would do that. I like that idea. That's a good one. Got any more pearls of wisdom? I'm sure
I
we'll
will.
dig
I
out
will
some
share.
more
I
pearls
will
as we
share
go
more
here.
with you.
Okay, so from a standpoint of traditional publishing, or shall we call it going through a publishing house, you can use some stuff that some writings that you have, whether online or whatever. Find by going to a bookstore, find the subject topic that would be similar to what you're doing. Do some research
It's
as
called the
to
genre of
the
the
genre.
book. The genre.
Good, thank you. Find out from looking at some of the books who the publishers are, and then you can look and see who the literary agent and or the, what was the other term?
Acquisitions editor.
Acquisitions editor.
So a literary
might
agent
be.
is an outside third party who is a gatekeeper for the books and manuscripts that go to the top tier publishers. They cannot handle the thousands of manuscripts that show up on their desk. So they in fact have, as part of their submission guidelines now on their website, saying that we do not take unsolicited manuscripts or book proposals. So you have no choice but to find a literary agent who can then approach one of the publishers.
Do they don't tell you who they might be on those websites.
No, they don't tell you that.
So that's
You need-
where this little research process at the bookstore would come in handy.
Yes, that's right.
Very interesting.
So you asked me originally a question about the self-publishing route and how difficult is that process compared to perhaps the traditional. I would recommend any person looking to write a book or a potential author to first sit down and write a marketing plan.
Write a marketing plan.
Yes, because depending on how you plan to get the book across to the reader, that might help you decide whether you wish to go the traditional route or you wish to be published, to do a self-publish. And so let me give you an example. I have
Please.
8 books with the top tier publishers, and if I may quickly hold
Sure.
this up, this is with Prentice Hall, this is with Random House, and this is with Glencoe McGraw-Hill.
Okay.
And so, all these books were better published by a top tier publisher
Because why?
because they have sales reps and they have incredible amount of distribution already set up.
Okay.
And in fact, so again, the marketing model for this particular book, which is for vocational training schools, Glencoe at the time, or McGraw-Hill, had a couple hundred sales reps. So you have somebody hand selling your book to a particular market.
Interesting.
On the other
Are they
hand,
still doing that sort of thing these days? I mean,
yeah, they still, and they have catalogs. So they still have catalogs that go to various buyers. So even libraries buy from these people who, the sales reps who show up with catalogs and show them what the next set of books. And then so I did self-published Raising Yourself. And the reason for this was I wanted full control on the distribution. I also wanted to have full control on the pricing. I wanted to have the control on how long the book would be in market. It's been out for 10 years, 10, 12 years now. This would be a backlist within 6 months to 1 year with a traditional publisher.
backlist. That's a
Backlist means
term.
that it's already, they've already given it the maximum
they've
exposure.
moved on to
They've
something
moved
else.
on to
Okay.
something else. So,
Ah.
and so if you're will be doing your book marketing as an author, and you'll be doing more back of the room sales, then you may actually want to consider doing self-publishing. So your marketing plan will help you determine which way you would optimally would like to go.
Okay.
And then reality can set in whether the traditional publishers pick you up on the first round or not.
Would it be, is it feasible that if you start out on a self-publishing track, that the traditional houses might become interested in the book and ask to pick it up, or you could take it to them after you get some market penetration?
Would you like some good examples for that? James Redfield, Celestine Prophecy.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He self-published a book because nobody took him up.
Ah,
He went around in his car, apparently. I mean, this is a story that I read about him, and he sold the books from the back of his car, but basically from the trunk. And then Warner Brothers picked up the book, and the rest is history. Sold 1 million or more copies of his book.
wow.
John Grisham,
John Grisham.
Time to Kill,
Right.
self-published. And there are dozens and dozens of more examples of people. In fact, the Christmas book, Christmas box,
Oh yeah, yeah.
sorry,
yeah.
a Christmas box, that also is self-published.
So it is reasonable.
It is reasonable. And then you can choose whether you wish to be picked up by the top tier publishers at that point of time. Because there are risks for if you continue to self-publish that book, which is now suddenly 1 million people want it, you might run into something known as returns, which is a very, very painful process in the whole book industry.
Meaning they're sending the book back and want their money back?
That's right.
So if you're self-publishing, there's, it seems to me, possibilities of whether it's a digital book and just an ebook, or it's a physical hard copy book. And is that part of your marketing plan strategy, I would think, that you were just mentioning? And what are the advantages of going one way or the other, or should you be having it through both medium?
You can, again, your marketing plan will help you determine which way you want to go. So if you're doing back of the room sales with your speaking, then you would obviously want to have a hard copy.
That makes
It's very
sense.
hard to sell an ebook when you're sitting there, and most of the people will walk away and say, "Oh yeah, I'll get it later" or something, and you know how that goes.
Because then
the
you
sales
can
drop.
also write your little,
Note.
to Mary Ann, thank you.
And there's nothing like having a physical copy in hand to hand off.
Ah.
However, in today's with ebooks and the number of people who are actually reading ebooks, my just mentioned this, my 75-year-old neighbor was buying books until last year. Last Christmas, his grandkids gave him a Kindle.
Oh.
Guess what? He stopped buying books.
Oh wow!
So
he
we
just downloads
can
them
no
from-
longer
from
borrow his
Amazon.
books now.
He can't borrow his books
Books,
now.
unfortunately.
You know, it's interesting because I own a Kindle, so I do ebooks. But I find for myself, this is just for me, that if I'm reading something that is a business book or something that's going to be some type of reference material for me, I want the physical book because I'm underlining things and scoring it in yellow or making notes in the margin or something like that. And if I'm trying to think, oh, where did I see that? It was in such and such a book, and the visual hits me. I can find it very quickly. And I have a challenge doing that with an ebook, maybe just because I haven't delved into easier ways to do that. But for more recreational reading, hey, it's a lot easier to bring that little critter than to bring 3 or 4 books on an airplane.
True. That's true.
So does that have any, I guess let's talk a little bit more about this marketing plan strategy, because that's for me, that's sort of a new concept. I mean, I always thought, maybe someday I ought to write a book and I have these ideas and I'll just jot some things down and then I'll just find a place to put it online and, whatever. But when you think through, what are the key strategies that you should be thinking through in terms of a marketing plan that are things you have to consider regarding your book?
Okay, so what I would recommend for the listeners is that they should go online and download something known as writing a book proposal.
Writing a book proposal.
So your part of your marketing plan also involves writing a book proposal, and that talks about the tentative title that you have in mind, your target audience, what you expect to price the book, what is the competition, what is the distribution, what is your unique some selling points or something else that would get you more exposure. Can you spin this book into multiple media formats? So you can start with a hardcover, then as a lot of the top tier publishers do with say a John Grisham book, they give you come out with a hardcover, make maximum money on that. Then they come up with a soft cover a few months later,
Right.
and then that's the mass market. And then now because of the digital format, it also shows up on multiple ebook formats.
And then you could even take it into what they used to call books on tape, so make an audio book
Like
out
an
of it,
audiobook
couldn't
too.
you?
That's correct.
Interesting. And I can see the advantages of going with multiple of those mediums so that you can optimize your potential penetration.
If the book is a reference book, it's worthwhile looking at it as first as an ebook. And people
Really?
need reference books quickly. I was giving a talk at an education conference, and I needed to just substantiate some certain points. So I went online, looked at some books, found something that I liked. It was there was a soft download from Amazon. 5 minutes later, I had the book. I quickly scanned the book. I got a few points that I wanted out of it, and I was ready for my presentation.
Ah,
If I had to get a
hard copy.
hard copy,
That would
I
be
need to find a bookstore. If
Right.
the bookstore doesn't have a copy, then they will order it. It'll take 5 to 8 days for me to get the book, and by the time the conference is over.
Wow. All right. So let's talk about probably the hardest part of this whole thing, and that is taking action to create a book. I mean, you've mentioned that you need to start logically with a marketing plan or whatever, but that first step of actually sitting down and making the decision to start. I think I mentioned to you just a little before the show that creating a book or writing a book is something that I've thought about for a long time, and I do a lot of writing activity. I have a blog. I write copy for ads. I've written magazine articles. I do a newsletter, all this sort of stuff. So the idea of sitting down there and creatively putting information from thought into physical form is not new to me. It's not a challenge for me. I love to do it. But I think about going to the book phase, and it's like, oh gosh, that looks like a lot of work. I don't know if I'm ready for that. So how,
Okay, and let me help you out a little with that. So everything starts with an idea first. You feel that you want to write a book for a particular topic, and you start collecting information. It's funny how things turn out in life. Once you put your mind to something, lots of information starts coming your way. So what I do and what works for me and for all these books that I've written and continue to write, and I have a few more in the works as well, I have separate file folders where I keep putting information in for
Oh.
everything related to that book
Okay.
or that particular book that I have in mind. And some people work better on computers, some work in a mixed media. I like to work mixed. Sometimes I write thoughts on a computer if I'm close to that. If I'm driving, I can just put the words on tape or on my cell phone, or at times I just call my work. I've got a 5-minute
the
message,
message
so I
thing
just
that-
leave a long-winded message for my own self.
Right.
Because the key thing is you don't want to forget those ideas.
Right.
You want to put them down right away.
Right.
I keep a notepad and a pen right next to my bed. So sometimes I wake up at 2:30 in the morning with an idea and I just scribble some key words. My eyes are not open, but I write them in. It's great because all
That
I
makes
need is the
sense.
key words.
Yeah.
I'm not writing the whole English behind it, just the key words.
Right.
There are actually books on how to write a book. There are seminars and there are classes on how to write a book. The best way to start really is to write out a table of contents, and you can always rearrange the table of contents, but you need a map of where you start and where you're going,
Right.
and then it's a dynamic whole table of contents. But creating a table of contents is crucial because that starts giving you those extra folders that you could put into place,
Oh, okay.
and so that's a very good start.
What it's telling me is it takes, how do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? And rather than looking at this massive thing, oh gosh, I got to come over, you can break it down into more confrontable components. And I think another thing that you mentioned that is interesting and reasonable to me is that you can, once you've identified, you call it the table of contents, you just let the universe bring information to you, and then so you put it in there. Because one of the things that had challenged me was the idea of I got to start here and I got to go through linearly to get over here. And what you're suggesting is that's not really the case.
I write sometimes in chapter 1, sometimes chapter 18, sometimes chapter 10. Wherever I get an idea, I just go into that file or on my computer or wherever I'm writing or in a notebook, and I just write out whatever comes to mind. So it is absolutely not a linear process.
Well, that's useful. That's
Yes.
good.
And then you can put yellow sticky notes, whatever helps you to get those ideas across.
Right.
And there is another important thing to mention here as well. Don't get hung up on the language. Dotting the I's and crossing the T's and stuff, even if you put ... on a certain idea, just put it in there. Because as your mind works on it, You'll pick up more information and you'll go back and start filling that information in.
Got it.
And ultimately, you are going to need an editor.
Okay.
No matter how good your English is, even if you're an English professor, you will have somebody else edit your book for you. You'll have the book, your manuscript professionally proofread.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Those are different things. The editing and the proofreading are different things.
That's
and,
correct.
And so let's explain to the audience what the distinction is between those two roles.
Okay, first and foremost, you need to come to a point and say, okay, enough. I'm not writing anymore. And that's very hard for an author to do. It's never finished. So
Right.
you have to have I would recommend you have a drop dead date on yourself that by this and this date, my manuscript will be ready to a point and I'm going to hand it off to an editor.
Okay.
For editing, there are two kinds of editors. There may be more, but there are at least two. One is a straight editor who just take your information, edit it, make it look good, make sure your language flows well from starting from chapter 1 through whatever chapters that you have.
And that would be typeface and
No, the
all-
typeface and all comes for the person who actually does the book layout for you.
Okay.
So that's a
okay,
different
that's
person.
a different thing.
That's a
Okay,
different thing.
So
So
when we're talking about editing, we're talking about is the spelling right? Is the
is the English correct? Is it
English-
grammatically correct?
Okay.
Does the idea flow from paragraph 1 to paragraph
Okay.
B? And are you communicating the information that you want to communicate in that particular chapter?
and this is not someone at the publishing house. This is well before the book gets there.
Okay, so if you're working with a publishing house, you would hand them the manuscript and they would do this process behind the scenes. If
Okay.
you're doing this on a self-published route, then you
have to
have your
find-
own team of people that you use for editing and for proofreading and
Got it.
etc.
Okay.
Second kind of an editor is a content editor. So you have the idea and you have the main big picture, and you tell the person, now develop this idea. So they do the research and they start adding in and putting in more meat into the writing.
Okay.
And so that's the second. And so there are various price points for both. Because
Mhm.
obviously a straight editor will charge you X,
Mhm.
but somebody who's doing content also has to do some more work.
Right.
So the pricing could be different on that.
Okay.
So you need to allocate certain amount of money
So
for doing
to a
that.
certain, I would think that depending upon the type of book that you're writing, you may or may not need a content editor.
That's correct.
Okay. But you will need the other kind of editor you
You
mentioned.
absolutely need an editor. Your book comes out that much more stronger. If
Got
it's
it.
well edited, you have one chance for the reader.
Yes. Yes, that's true.
Any kind of a mistake and they'll just put the book down, move on.
Right. Okay. That's the editor, and the proofreader is
Proofreader cleans up what the editor doesn't catch.
okay.
And so the proofreader actually goes in and really tightens up the language.
Okay.
It's an excellent function. So you must absolutely, I would recommend for anybody thinking of self-publishing to go through those two steps
Okay.
and have those two different people do it.
All right. So let's talk a little bit in this last few minutes here about the costs associated with publishing, whether that I as an author might have if I'm going through a traditional method or if I'm going through a self-publishing method. And are they comparable, or is one more challenging financially than the other? And what's been your experience?
So on the traditional method, the answer is very simple. It all comes down to royalties. They will negotiate, the publisher will negotiate the royalty with you. So you will get a certain percentage on the net sales of the book.
Okay.
So let's take a very high
But
level.
your cost of production, of getting to the point where you can bring the book, is just your time.
Just your
to
time and
write.
writing it. And you
Okay.
don't do any editing unless you had that arrangement with the publisher.
Okay.
Normally, the editing process is something that's handled in-house by the publisher.
Okay.
There are various cost models in this, and there are various publishers who would take a book or manuscript from you in a certain up to a certain with certain steps already completed, and then they are more generous on the royalties with you.
Got it.
So typical royalties is 5 to 15%
Okay.
of the net sales.
Right.
So that's after the discounted price.
Okay, that makes sense.
And so you just hand the manuscript, sit back, watch, everything gets handled behind the scenes. On the self-publishing route, you have to allocate budgets for your editing, proofreading, the layout, the book layout,
Of course.
book cover design, the illustrations. If you need any illustrations, I have illustrations in my book. I have a separate artist who did the illustrations for me.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends a lot on the kind of book, again, that you're writing.
Mm-hmm.
If you self-publish and you establish your own company, you have to buy your own ISBN numbers.
ISBN numbers, that's the number
On
on the back of the book that,
yes.
that is a unique identifier for that individual.
International Standard Book Number.
Right.
And you get that from R.R. Bowker,
Okay.
Bowker. and there's an excellent book on self-publishing called The Self-Publishing Manual. It's
Okay.
by Dan Poynter.
Dan
That's with a
Poynter,
Y,
Self-Publishing Manual.
not an I. So Poynter. Excellent book.
Folks, remember, info@referencepointtv.com. We're covering some information. If you're not writing this down, send me an email and I'll get it to Sumant and we can get you these types of useful pieces of data. So let's go back. Okay, so each of those components are things that if you were going through the publishing house that we were just talking about, they're going to take care of, and based on, and they will adjust the royalty value appropriately depending upon what their cost of activity is. But if you're doing it yourself, you've got to deal with that. And so then if you're going to do some hard copies as a self-publisher, you have to pay for that too, don't you?
You have to pay for that? Yes. So again, your marketing plan will determine whether you wish to go on the hard copy or you go for a paperback, which is much cheaper to print.
Right.
And so also you also have to factor in how many copies you expect to sell. Otherwise, your garage is going to be full of books. Actually, it's not a good place. The garage is not a good place to put your books. You're better off putting your something else there and just putting them in your bedroom.
Right. To
then-
remind you, you have to move them. Listen, we have less than 2 minutes left in the show. So can we just summarize? Does it make sense for someone to do publishing? Should people write books? Should
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Sometimes it works out as an expensive calling card, business card, but it's definitely worthwhile. For me, it was great. It was a gift to my parents. My first book, I dedicated the book to my parents.
Nice.
So, well, for future benefit, I would
So
think.
that worked out good for you. Hey, kudos. That
Yes,
was
so-
good. I'll remember
so
that one. That was a good
that's,
thing.
that's-
Well, this has been really cool. I appreciate, Sumant, that you came back to talk to us about the publishing side of things, because for me it was very useful data. Hopefully the viewing audience got something out of it. And don't forget, folks, if you have questions or issues or even ideas for other shows that we should do here, send your queries to info@referencepointtv.com. So Sumant, thank you again for being one of my guests. I greatly appreciate it. I want to thank the audience for viewing us and all our staff here who make this show possible. And folks, we'll see you next time on Reference Point.